Welcome back. 6:23. We talk a lot about it. Over the past few months, the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency, commonly known as DOGE, has been making cuts to federal agencies, and that includes cuts to the National Weather Service.
Well, what exactly does this mean for our region, and will we be impacted by these cuts? Well, Josh joins us here this morning, and you've been working on this story for months now, trying to get some answers.
Yeah, it's been in the oven baking for a while. Well, when news of this first broke, I began searching for information on what the impact of these cuts would be, especially when it comes to forecasting in our region. That's what this story was going to be about, but I found out many more people had more questions than answers. So when news of the cuts first happened, I reached out to the National Weather Service office here in Pendleton. I wanted to ask how many people were losing their jobs and how it was going to impact the region. The office referred me to another person in the agency to talk with. I reached out, but didn't get a response.
The overall goal here with the DOGE team is to help address the enormous deficit. We simply cannot sustain as a country a $2 trillion deficit.
I began reaching out to our local lawmakers, including Republican Congressman Dan Newhouse. I asked Congressman Newhouse about the cuts DOGE is making, affecting people right here in his district and neighboring districts. I was told he would get back to me. In the meantime, a statement was published on his website on passing the budget resolution, which included cuts to weather agencies. It states, passing the budget resolution unlocks the next step in the reconciliation process, allowing Congress to reduce federal spending, lower inflation, and advance a conservative agenda to get our country back on track. It will be no easy task, but Republicans must stay unified to deliver for the American people.
We will make mistakes. We won't be perfect, but when we make a mistake, we'll fix it very quickly.
Next, I learned Washington Senator Patty Murray was hosting a virtual press conference on the recent cuts to the National Weather Service. I took it as an opportunity to get some answers, but instead, it appears I'm not the only one feeling left in the dark.
So I was hoping someone maybe knows the quantity of the layoffs at perhaps that station in particular.
We don't know the answer to that because we're not being given the information by the administration. What we have seen so far is employees like this just get their notice 2 hours before they're told their phone's going to be shut off, and that's when we find out. So I don't have the answers to that. I don't know if anybody else does.
The National Weather Service is not the only agency taking a big hit. Washington Senator Maria Cantwell says she is shocked at what she says is the Trump administration's plans to gut the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, commonly known as NOAA.
These staffing shortages are already impacting NOAA's core functions, including reduced and suspended weather balloon launches at many of our weather forecast offices. And I can't tell you how important this is for us, particularly related to fire season. These NOAA weather activities are giving us essential data about how best to prepare for fire season.
Dr. Rick Spinrad is a former administrator for NOAA. He says he's worried these cuts could put each forecasting office in a bind.
Please bear in mind that those weather forecast offices, almost every one of them was already operating at barely acceptable, in some cases below acceptable levels.
The layoff situation is going beyond the employee cuts already handed down by DOGE. Back in March of this year, a protest was held in Yakima called Stand Up for Science. I talked with Paul Tabion, who was part of the rally. He says he's worried making cuts to local forecasting offices will directly impact farmers.
Well, as someone who's worked in industry and had to rely on weather, you rely on all sources, and it's primarily when you have a national source, your local sources also reiterate that same information, and if you don't have this chain of operation, you literally have people presenting false information.
The proposed funding cuts to the National Weather Service have been co-signed by House Republicans, including Congressman Dan Newhouse. I reached out again in April to the congressman to ask him about the cuts and how it would impact local weather forecasting and its district, as well as regional responses to wildfires. His team sent me a text message. While I agree with reducing the bloated federal workforce and related spending, we must ensure that positions critical to public safety are maintained. And cuts to the National Weather Service and NOAA are just two of the areas that are seeing significant impacts from the big, beautiful bill. Coming up tomorrow morning, it's part two. I'm telling you about the cuts to the U.S. Forest Service and concerns on how it could impact responses to wildfires just as the season gets underway.
important information. And so talk to us a little bit about these cuts. Can you tell us if you do know of any cuts that have happened to the National Weather Service here in Pendleton, or have they already been operating kind of at that understaffed level?
Yeah, so it's kind of nuanced, right? I reached out to a source with the National Weather Service Union. They wanted to remain anonymous, but they're very familiar with the National Weather Service office in Pendleton, and they told me that normal staffing for the National Weather Service in Pendleton, for it to be considered 100% fully staffed, that would be 13 full-time meteorologists. Even before the DOGE cuts, they were at 8, so 8 out of 13 is like 60% capacity. Now, they haven't seen any personnel cuts from DOGE, but I think that underscores a very important point, that this was already sort of a systemic issue in the National Weather Service, understaffing across the country. And so this isn't a problem that DOGE created, but in many instances it is being exacerbated. Yeah,
and we are seeing that, especially right now with the floods in Texas. I know a lot of talk has been about the staffing and whether that area was fully staffed or staffed in a shortage. And it does, like you said, it sounds like nationwide this has been an issue even prior to some of the federal cuts that we've seen.
Yeah, definitely. And so that, you know, as someone who is obviously a meteorologist, I'm very concerned about public safety, sort of the politics aside, and that's hard to do in this story, but it was already an existing problem where the solution to me would be more funding to these agencies, more personnel staff, and so it is a little concerning that it seems like the vibe of this administration is going the other direction. Now, of course, the course could change, but we'll have to see how that pans out.
And you've got part 2 coming up tomorrow, and if people want to learn more about this, where can they find that?
Yeah, so we have a longer version of this story at applevalleyNewsNow.com. Congressman Dan Newhouse, the text message you saw at the end of the story, he said a lot more about this. So we've got the full text on the article, and you can also watch an extended version of this story on our YouTube page as well.
All right, thanks. Looking forward to part 2.